Thank you for tuning into our podcast. We are coming to you from Holyoke, Massachusetts. I am your host, Carrie, and I am here with our very own historian, Robert Kuhn. He is the founder and also the tour guide of the Historical Tours of Greater Holyoke. He offers both public and private tours of the local canal systems, reservoirs, cemeteries, as well as various parks and streets in Holyoke, South Hadley, and Chicopee, Mass. You can check out his website for more information at holyokecanaltour.org. There he has videos, photos, past and present, and as well as 2023 schedule for this year. Today we are going to be discussing the old South Hadley burial ground. So tell us about the 1902 move from this burial ground.
Yes, it was a burial ground that was located on College Street in South Hadley, and in its place was put up the Gaylord Library by design, whereas the Gaylord family said, indeed, that we'll give you the money for a new library in the center of South Hadley, and only if you move the graveyard. And what a condition that was. And so South Hadley had the graveyard moved, and in 1902 they concentrated heavily upon the family sections being moved into the main body of Evergreen Cemetery, which was physically behind the old South Hadley burial ground. It's on a highway called Route 47, compared to the old South Hadley burial ground being on a highway called 116. And it was moved over a tributary of the Stony Brook, and they had to put a little bridge in. And they concentrated heavily on moving big family stones with, of course, the deceased bodies in their coffins. And they probably moved that first year about 1,000 burials. And they put it, some of them who wanted, the families showed up and they said, we want to have them in the main family section of Evergreen. And the reason why is we want to build upon and put more members of the family when they're deceased around this large family stone. So very large family stones were put in there and expanded upon through the year, and it worked. And if you go through the main body with the family sections, you see very old stones that predate even the existence of Evergreen Cemetery. Evergreen Cemetery is from 1868, and you'll see stones where all the burials are older than that. Now, within that 1,000 moves in the year 1902, there were also people that did not want to pay for a new burial ground, and they got a free spot and a free move of the stone in the deceased body, and that was on the little hill that's to the north of the family section. And there, they couldn't expand upon more deceased coming in after that year. And so that was that, and it took on the look of the original look of the 1902 section. But there are so many people that wanted even that much to happen. Now, there were even some single burials where the family said, can we move them this year into the back, and we'll put them in the section you pay for, and we just want them in the main body of Evergreen, which was nicer. And so throughout that section of Evergreen, which is enormous, they have all these very old burials. And people get very confused of this information with the 1903 move, which we'll talk about later. And on my tours and in the text on the webpage for this cemetery, I talk about this move, and I give newspaper descriptions. A lot of people think that the move was only 1903, was only 406 burials, moved to the very back. And we'll talk about that on another question. But keep this in mind, that's not what happened. It was a family move of people showing up and wanting them in the main body of the cemetery.
Now, so again for 1903, tell us about the move from that bit.
Okay, so 1903 comes around, a few more families show up, and they did as they did in 1902. So just remember what I said there. It's very important. But also in 1903, the families of the deceased stopped showing up. Word had gotten around South Hadley, around Massachusetts, around New England, that this cemetery was being moved. If you wanted to have a deceased member move into the main body, you had to show up or send a letter. Okay, now at some point in 1903, they say, that's it. We have all these bodies, and we're going to have to move them. And they're not going to go to the main section of Evergreen. They're going to go to the very back where Mount Holyoke College had given, through a deed, a free donation of land where all the remaining burials could be put. Now, what remained in the latter part of 1903 was 406 named burials with stones and deceased in coffins. Also, probably about 60 to 80 more bodies without names to them because there was no stone there. And so those were moved. And those were put in the very, very, very far back of what was now a part of Evergreen as of that year. It wasn't the historic part of Evergreen. But it was put in such arrangement, they were arranged in order by rows and columns, so everything is neatly organized. It looked nothing like the old Hadley burial ground on Route 116. Because there it was a true churchyard burial ground. People were arranged by families at different angles, and even the stones weren't arranged the right way. To have a true burial before 1850, you had to put the headstone facing towards the west, engraved names towards the west. The footstone would be engraved and facing towards the east. The head of the person, deceased person, in the coffin, would be positioned that his head would be towards the west and the feet towards the east. When you go down to the 1903 section in the back, that was not done. So you have no footstones, which are all thrown out. The headstones, sometimes they point east, sometimes they point west. They're supposed to be engraved towards the west. Okay, so it wasn't done in the old true way. Plus, they were scattered around, not kept with families. And there's always a randomness to a churchyard burial, which these lawn cemeteries like Evergreen do not have. So, you have what number two is people look at it and say, oh, these are where all the burials were moved. They didn't know what happened in 1902. And that was also reinforced by the book from 1976 called The Old Hadley Burial Ground, which gives the 406 engraved names of people. And these are all people in the back, and they totally ignore the 1,000 burials that are in the front portion of the old Hadley burial ground. Now, something even stranger. If you add together question number one here in this podcast, I've had those 1,000 burials in 1902 moved. In question two, I said there's probably 460 or so moved. There were in the year 1868, when Evergreen was made, the old Hadley burial ground probably from that point got a few more burials, but it had at any given time, if you count the amount of burials that happened in the old Hadley burial ground, there were 1,600 of them. That means about 200 of them or so were moved even prior to 1902 and 1903. They were moved because families loved the look of Evergreen compared to the old Hadley burial ground. And those 200 burials were put anywhere they wanted them inside of Evergreen. They were moved because of the good look. They had to pay for the stone being moved. They had to pay for the burials of the deceased being moved with their coffins. And they had to pay for a new plot of land on their own. So if 200 people had that move, and the family must have paid a lot of money to get into that old cemetery. But they got choice positions within that old burial ground.
And now, who is John Preston?
Okay, John Preston is the only person left and the Old Sahara Burial Ground. If you go into the back of the Gaylord Library, there's a little place for cars. Then there's an old tree way back. And to the side front of that old tree is John Preston's gravestone. He is the first adult that died in South Hadley. He is the first adult that was buried in the Old Hadley Burial Ground. He was buried there towards the front and towards the right as you look into the cemetery. John Preston is also the founder of South Hadley. He is the first person to move from Hadley into South Hadley. He got permission from the government of Hadley to go into this precinct that no settler had been in before. So he's the founder of South Hadley. For that reason, and for another reason, he remains in this Old Hadley Burial Ground alone. The other reason is when they went to talk to John Preston's family in 1902, they refused to give them permission to move the body. So they're the only family that did not sign the papers saying that they would move. What happened was, they said, since he's the founder of this cemetery, he gave the land for free, and he's the founder of South Hadley. You have to leave him in that cemetery. You can move him within the cemetery, but not out of the cemetery. So what they did, they took his body in stone, they moved it to the back middle of the cemetery, and there he lies since his death. And he's the only one left there. And so scattered to the wind with most of them, except one. And peculiarly, he's not the only single burial with Hadley. Mary Lyon also is a single burial with Hadley.
Okay, and now why was this cemetery even moved to begin with?
Okay, it was moved because the Gaylord family, one member of the Gaylord family, had started a public library in the Falls section. It was on Main Street. It doesn't exist anymore. It was basically where there's now a town public parking lot. And that was started, I think, in the 1880s, early 1880s. And it was the only library in the Falls until 1906, when the Carnegie Library started there. Now, another wing of the Gaylord Library said, well, if the Falls of South Hadley can have a library, then the center of South Hadley can have a library. And they said, we want to build it where the Old South Hadley Burial Ground is, because it has a beautiful view there of the Mount Holyoke Range in the background. It has a beautiful view of Mount Holyoke College across the street. It's going to help Mount Holyoke College have a nicer look at campus if you don't have the graveyard there. Graveyards weren't in high reputation in the year 1902. And so they said in the deed, you move the cemetery and we'll give you that money for that library. The library is still there. It's not the equal of the library in the Falls, but it's still there, and that's why you have only a single burial left in a very big old cemetery.
Okay, so thank you for listening to our podcast, and again, you can find out more information on his website at holyokecanaltours.org. Again, you can check out his videos, past and present photos, and his upcoming 2023 schedule, and the various different tours. So, again, his email is holyokecanaltours.org, and you can also email him directly for any information or private or tours. So his email is bobcat4214, capital B, at yahoo.com. Again, that's BOBCAT4214, capital B, at yahoo.com. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for tuning into our podcast. We are coming to you from South Hadley, Massachusetts. I am your host, Carrie, and joining me is Holyoke's very own local historian and creator of the Historical Tours of Greater Holyoke, Robert Cohen, in which he offers both public and private tours, as well as presentations of the local canal systems, reservoirs, cemeteries, and churches, as well as various parks and streets in Holyoke, South Hadley, and Chicopee, Mass. Now you actually lead these tours and give these presentations yourself, is that correct?
Yes, and I love this Evergreen Cemetery because I found out a lot of cool facts about it.
Okay, so tell us about the pre-1900 history of this cemetery.
It started in 1868 as a almost a garden-style cemetery, and it was part of a movement across the United States where people wanted to get older urban or churchyard cemeteries out of that area into areas where people didn't live. And this one merely moved it 300 yards, but it was a big difference because it got out into the woods compared to the old Hadley Cemetery that was along first a churchyard, then across the street from the college. Now, one thing that happened, well, people started getting buried here early on, and one thing that happened, people that had deceased members in the old Hadley burial ground noticed that this is a good cemetery, and they started moving the burials and the stones of the deceased into the Evergreen Cemetery. And I would guess that maybe about, let's say about 200 burials were moved. And this was pre-1900. And in fact, it was mostly in the 1880s that this occurred. And then it stopped. Most people that wanted to, had deceased members that wanted to move them, moved them. But they also got the hint that South Hadley, as a government, wanted to move everyone in the cemetery. And if you moved them before 1900, you had to pay for the move of the stone and of the body and buy a new burial plot inside the Evergreen. So that's expensive. It's like burying a person all over again. Very expensive.
So what happened in 1902 and 1903?
Well, finally, the hint that South Hadley was going to move all the burials from the old South burial ground, where the Gaylord Library is now, happened. In 1902, they started. And the town of South Hadley paid for the movement of the stone, paid for the movement of the body, paid for the new burial plot inside of Evergreen. And where they were buried depended upon whether the family showed up or not. So in 1902, if a family member showed up and they said, I want this deceased member and this one moved plus a stone down there to the new family plot, and I'm going to pay for it, then they were allowed to move into the family section. So the midsection of Evergreen has a lot of family plots from 1902. If after 1902 you go to 1903, the town of South Hadley is still moving people, and they're saying if a person shows up, then they'll move them, but it stopped. Everyone that wanted to move a family member had done so. So as 1903 went along, so I had to say to themselves, okay, what we're going to do is going to be different. We're going to try to contact them as best we can. If they show up and they respond somehow, then we'll bury them in the little hillet, or small hill, beyond the modern-day graveside chapel. And in the town of South Hadley, will pay for the move, will pay for the burial plot, and pay for the stone to be moved. So, people that showed up and said, okay, we'll do that. We don't necessarily want our own family plot going, but just put them up in that cluster on the hill. So, in 1903, that was the big situation. All right, but something else is going to happen. Time goes on. Not everyone shows up. Not everyone responds. So,
quickly before we continue with the rest of our interview, just to fill our listeners in, if you want to find out more information or you want to sign up for any of his various tours, you can check out his website at holyokecanaltour.org. And there he has both videos of the various stops along each tour and also past and present photos of the historical sites throughout as well. And if you're interested in setting up a private tour, you can email him directly at bobcat4214, capital B, at yahoo.com. And they are perfect for fun and educational outdoor activities for the whole family or for your group parties, especially those special occasions and get-togethers. And they are also good just for getting outdoors for the day. So getting back to our interview, what happened in 1904?
okay, They've been going 1902, 1903, now 1904. So everyone that shows up or everyone that responds somehow has now moved either to the family plots or to the special place on the hill. 1904, they're left with about 480 burials. No one showed up. So, where do they go? They go to the very far back of the Evergreen Cemetery in an organized plot. And the stones are taken, the bodies are taken, and they're put there because none of the family members have ever responded or showed up. Now, it looks like this was done by intent, that you moved the whole of the old Sahai burial ground to the back of Evergreen. No, that's only 480 burials. There are 1,500 burials in the old Sahai burial ground. And only 480 are in the back there, where it looks like an old-time cemetery. All the rest of them are into the family plots, which moved either pre-1900 or moved in 1902, or into the little scattered around hillock in 1903. And all that's around in the back, where it looks old, is the family has never bothered to show up. So, what a difference. Now, it is known that some were moved to other cemeteries around the area. One of the Gaylord stones and the entire Bowden family in stone was moved to Sally Falls Cemetery. There's quite a possibility that a couple of them were moved to a cemetery in Granby. And it's quite possible they moved to other communities too. That'll be hard to prove. There's no set list. There are a list of other situations that had to do with the cemetery, but no set list of all the stones and where they were moved and so forth. So it's going to be very hard to figure out what's really going on here.
Now, what has been the character of the cemetery since then?
Okay, after 1904, what do? Well, you start to fill in the rest of the cemetery. So the modern stones from then started being filled in the back towards the west of the family plots. And then towards the south, you got a lot of individual and mix of smaller family plots. And then you have a lot of individual stones towards the bottom of that little hill I've been talking about. Evergreen does own a little bit more land than it has to be developed. They also own the triangle that is at the entrance. There's the entrance road, but then there's a triangle that's fairly large off to the side. That's where a former house was, and they bought the rights to that property. With that deed, they can now develop all that land if they care to. They haven't done so yet, but if they ever run out of room towards the parts that they developed, then they have plenty of space to go into in this large entrance place. So the character is pretty cool. If you understand what you're looking at, then you'll understand a lot about South Hadley's history. If you don't, you get confused by this bizarre mixture of old and new together. Why would a cemetery director ever do such a thing? So thank you for listening to this podcast.
And thank you, Robert, for educating us on your tours. And we want to thank our listeners for tuning in. And you can also tune into a large selection of our other podcasts and much more at his website. Again, that's holyokecanaltour.org. And again, you can email him directly for private tours or to inquire about anything else at bobcat4214, and be sure to keep an eye out for his upcoming 2024 season tours and more as they become available. Thank you for tuning in.